Okay, guys. I'm sorry if I'm a little bit close to the camera. I just don't know where I could film this thing. This is Changing the Status Quo in American Culture by Joey Pankowski. So, let's start with the big idea. When we think about American culture, we often think about movies, books, theater, and how they simply act as entertainment. But these forms of media can also influence how people understand themselves and society around them. For this presentation, I have five works I'd like to show you. These are The Hate That You Give, Hamilton, Black Panther, Beyonce's Formation, and Everything Everywhere All at Once. Although these works are significantly different from each other in some way, shape, or form, they all have something very important in common I'd like to share with you. That they take experiences that have often been marginalized or stereotyped and place them at the center of America's popular culture. My argument is that these works are culturally significant not just because they were successful, but because they encouraged audiences to question the status quo and reconsider whose stories get represented in American culture. So let's start with The Hate You Give. The first work by Angie Thomas, published in 2017, stars Star Carter, a black teenager who lives in a poor black neighborhood but attends a mostly white private school. Her life changes whenever she witnesses her childhood best friend Khalil being shot and killed by a police officer. This was significantly important at the time because when this book came out, protests about Black Lives Matter and police brutality were running rampant through the world. Um, that is this book's most important cultural contribution. It asks readers to consider how race, policing, poverty, and media coverage affect real people. It also shows how Star struggles with code switching, or AKA switching her voice from talking to her friends at school versus being at home with her family. This novel became a major success and was adapted into a film in 2018 starring Amandla Steinberg. What made this book especially significant is that it gives a young black woman the authority to tell her own story about racism and police violence. Instead of allowing society to define the experience for her, Star becomes the person who speaks about it herself. That connects directly to my overall argument. Representation isn't just about seeing someone in a book or a movie, it's about who gets to tell your story. Now, speaking of who gets to tell your story, it's a big quote from this musical, Hamilton. Written by Lin-Manuel Miranda and premiered in 2015, the musical tells the story of Alexander Hamilton, the founding fathers of the United States. However, Miranda tells the 18th century story using modern musical styles such as rap and hip hop and casts a predominantly Black and Latino cast for the mainly white founding fathers. This was especially interesting because the musical appeared during a time when Americans were having increasingly intense conversations about race, immigration, and who gets represented in American history. The show essentially asks one major question that's related to this presentation. What happens when we tell America's founding story when the people in the music with the people and music of America right now? The casting is significant because the traditional portrayals of the founding fathers generally center white historical figures and white actors. Hamilton changes that visual representation while still telling the traditional story of the founding fathers. I think a major takeaway from this presentation is that Hamilton doesn't just tell us about America's past, it makes us think about how Americans choose to remember that past. Next up is Black Panther. Black Panther stars T'Challa. I'm sorry if I messed that up. The king and protector of Wakanda, a fictional African nation that has avoided colonization and become technologically advanced because of its supply of vibranium. On the surface, it's a superhero movie, but culturally, it is much, much more than that. For decades, Hollywood has frequently portrayed Africa through images of poverty, primitiveness, or helplessness. Black Panther completely reverses this idea by imagining an African nation as powerful, wealthy, technologically advanced, and independent as any you could imagine. The movie doesn't just ask what a black superhero would look like. It asks what's an interaction to show how black culture affects America and Africa for that point. The movie creates an intense debate between T'Challa and Killmonger. Killmonger argues that Wakanda has a huge responsibility to help oppress black people across the world, while T'Challa initially represents a more isolationist position. It also asks questions about colonization, African identity, inequality, and the relationship between African Americans and Africa itself. That, in my opinion, is why Black Panther was so culturally important. It made Black identity and African history central to one of Hollywood's biggest blockbuster franchise. And not just that, it showed Hollywood that audiences would show up and support a movie that was centered around Black actors and Black culture and history. Next up Formation. I didn't really like how the Super Bowl went, but the halftime show was pretty good. The fourth work is Beyonce's song and music video, Formation, released in 2016. The song celebrates Black identity, Southern culture, Black beauty, and Black history, while also making references to racism and police brutality. Its timing was extremely important as the United States was experiencing major conversations about racial inequality and police violence. Beyonce then performed Formation during the Super Bowl halftime show, putting these political and cultural messages in front of one of the largest television audiences in America. The song is very important because it connects race and gender. Beyonce isn't simply presenting Black identity as something to be tolerated. She presents Blackness, Black womanhood, and Southern culture as a whole as sources of pride and power. Scholar, and forgive me if I mess this name up, um, Umske Natasha Tinsley's Beyonce Information examines this song and video through Black feminism, gender, sexuality, and identity. So Formation demonstrates how music can become more than just entertainment. It can become a way of making a political and cultural statement. And because Beyonce was already one of the biggest celebrities in America, this message reached an enormous mainstream audience. Next up, my final work is Everything Everywhere All at Once, directed by Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert and released in 2022. The film follows Evelyn Wang, a Chinese American immigrant who runs a laundromat with her husband, Waymond. The main premise is that she discovers that versions of herself exist across different universes and that she has to confront a threat connected to her daughter, Joy. The movie sounds like a science fiction action film, but underneath the multiverse theory is a story about immigration, family, identity, generational conflict, and belonging. Its cultural context is very important, due in part to the fact that it arrived around the time of COVID-19, which was represented in America by a very widespread of anti-Asian racism at the time. Moving forward, the movie became an enormous cultural success. At the end of 2023 Academy Awards, it won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Actress for Michelle Yeoh, and Best Supporting Actor for Ke Huy Quan. That was significant because the Asian actors had historically been unrepresented and stereotyped in Hollywood. What makes the movie especially interesting is that it doesn't present Asian American identity in only one way. It combines Chinese culture, immigrant experiences, family drama, absurd comedy, and science fiction all in action. The message essentially is that there isn't one correct way to be an Asian American or an American in general. So, the bigger picture. Who gets to tell America's story? So far, with everything I've shown, these works demonstrate how cultural influence can cross between different forms of media. The Hate You Give moved from a novel to a film, while Hamilton took historical figures and transformed them through modern music. Black Panther and Everything All at Once demonstrated how stories can be centered around people of color and could still become mainstream successes, while Beyonce used one of the largest entertainment platforms in America to bring conversations about race and identity into popular culture. Ultimately, I think the significance of these works comes down to representation and perspective. They don't simply add different people to existing American stories. They ask us to reconsider these stories themselves. Who gets to tell them? Whose experiences are considered important, and what assumptions audiences bring with them? That is why these texts matter within American culture. They show that entertainment can reflect society, but it could also challenge society and help change what audiences consider normal. Thank you very much for listening. These are my works cited, and have a great day.